This is the second of two daily devotionals for Saturday, January the 8th, 2022. The title of this devotional is A Scourge of Famine and the Prophecy of Plenty. Now, the scripture reading today was 2 Kings 6 and 2 Kings 7. This devotional, which is the second one for the day, will be taken from 2 Kings 7. Now, it is a continuing of the historical narrative that we began in 2 Kings chapter 6 with the Syrian invasion of Israel, a siege of Samaria, the capital city of northern Israel. Now, there's a chapter break between 6 and 7, obviously. However, I want to encourage you to understand that the setting here is a continuing story that is taking place within the home of Elisha in the city of Samaria. Now, the king of Israel, in anger, has sent a messenger to seek out Elisha for the purpose of arresting him and ultimately beheading him, because the king of Israel is blaming all the famine, all the sorrow, all the suffering in Samaria on the prophet Elisha, in effect really blaming it on the Lord himself. Well, 2 Kings chapter 7, we pick up our story where Elisha answered the scoffing messenger that had been sent to him with the promise that the next day the Lord would provide so abundantly that flour and barley would be sold in the gates of the city and would be very inexpensive. One of the elders of the city questioned Elisha, "Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be?" Well, Elisha answered the faithless man and foretold he would see the Lord provide, but he would not live to partake of it. Well, we come to an interesting story of 2 Kings 7 verses 3 through 11 of 4 starving lepers. Now, leprosy was a terrible scourge in ancient times. It's treatable today, unless you're in a third world country, which it's very much still present. But lepers truly understood what it was to be social distance and suffered the sorrow and the loneliness of being societal outcasts. Well, these 4 lepers were sitting outside the gate of the city, for they dare not try to enter into the city. And the lepers realized that, like everyone that was in the city, they themselves would starve to death unless someone had mercy on their souls. And therefore, they determined, these 4 lepers, to go to the Syrian encampment and hope they might be shown compassion. They reason a fatal idea or philosophy, and saying in verse 4 of 2 Kings 7, well, let us fall into the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall but die. In other words, if we stay here, we're going to die. If we go there, we might die, but we might live. While approaching the outer perimeter of the Syrian camp, the lepers found it had been abandoned in haste. The scriptures reveal in 2 Kings 7 and verse 6 and 7 that the Lord had so stirred the soldiers of Syria with the sounds of an approaching army and the noise of chariots. And so the Syrians supposed that Israel had hired mercenaries, and the army left everything, their tents, their horses, their asses, even the camp as it was, and they fled for their lives to the Jordan River. Well, overwhelmed at their good fortune, the lepers enter the first tent, and they gorged themselves with food, and then they hoarded the silver and the gold and raiment, and they hid it for themselves. Well, they enter the second tent, and they began to do the same thing, but then their consciences were pricked, and they remembered those who were starving in Samaria. And it was not that they felt guilt for hoarding, but they feared some evil might befall them if they failed to tell others. Now, verses 10 through 20 of 2 Kings 7 brings us to the 4 lepers. Well, they left the Syrian encampment with all of the spoils and the food and the gold and the silver, and they departed and they went to the gate of Samaria, and they called into the porter or the guard of that gate and told them the good fortune that had befallen Israel, and how the Syrians had abandoned the siege and left all their possessions for spoil. Israel's king feared the Syrians were lying in ambush and waiting to draw the people out of the city to then take possession of Samaria. Well, the servant of the king, however, suggested a small group of soldiers would be sent to scout the countryside and try to locate the Syrian army. agreeing to the proposal, the king sent, and we read in verse 14, 2 chariot horses who found garments and vessels of the Syrians strewn along the way to the Jordan River. Well, those men returned to the city. The messengers assured the king that the Syrians had indeed fled Israel, casting aside all their provisions in their flight. Well, hearing the news and realizing the spoils of food and abundance of silver and gold were left by the Syrians, the people who were starving in Samaria rushed out of the city. And we read in verse 16, they spoiled the tents of the Syrians. I have a closing thought for you. And so it came to pass what Elisha had foretold. Flour and barley was sold in the gates of the city of Samaria for the price he had stated. The man who had scoffed that the Lord would provide in abundance was trampled underfoot by the people. He had indeed seen the Lord's provision, but he did not eat of it, even as Elisha had prophesied. What a tragic ending to a glorious story of God's care and provision for his people. You see, the man had questioned the Lord's prophet, but he lived to see all Elisha had prophesied come true. But his lack of faith had offended God, and he died seeing the promise fulfilled, but not realizing it for himself. And then I close with a question. Will you be numbered among those souls who refuse to trust the Lord and reject his provision of salvation through Jesus Christ as Savior? Will you realize too late your faithlessness has cost you your soul and eternity? Trust the Lord. Believe him. And the Bible says, and whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Won't you do that today? Thank you for joining me. I hope that you'll join me tomorrow as we continue our study of this historical book. God bless and bye-bye.